Today, we're going to be talking about supporting youth with depression during the pandemic and beyond, what families, schools, and communities can do. And I send a virtual hug from my house to your house. And before we get started, I want to just tell you also that I'm dedicating this talk to my father. He's 94 years old and not doing so well right now. So if you do happen to see me tear up when I'm talking about omniscient parent or some things that, don't worry, I'm fine. I just wanted to give you context so you would know that. And again, I so honor the work that each of you do as advocating for children. It's our future. And certainly we all have been asked to rise to support our kids during the pandemic and beyond. So I don't know if any of you all have at times thought, like, what day is it? You know, you're not the only one asking. And I know, hello, my name is, will this ever be over? And you may take a check and see, what would I say about where I am right now? And I just wanted to show you, look, you can see how long the pandemic has been by my hairline, right? So it's been 19 months and wow, hard to believe, right? So what are we going to be talking about today? We'll discuss how to recognize ambiguous loss, how to help teens manage disappointment, tell the difference between disappointment and depression, treat this pandemic as a challenge instead of a traumatic event, cultivate realistic optimism, and radically accept some things that are really hard. And it's a tall order, you all, in an hour, but we're going to do it. So, we know that schools and came to a grinding halt in March of 2019, and that many of us spent many months in our living room or providing support. And a concept that's been helpful is ambiguous loss. This is by Pauline Bloss, who talks about it. And we know that there have been real tangible losses, 700,000 people who have died in our country from COVID. And some of your students or children may have lost a parent or a relative during this time. And that there's food insecurity and real things on top of this ambiguous loss. And when it comes to working with kids with special needs, this is the new normal. And then there are the harder things to acknowledge. And what fueled us originally is that this was temporary, but part of the ambiguous loss now is that it feels permanent. And that question of when will this be over? Is there a new variant around the corner? And we have to be able to acknowledge with kids about what they miss. Fortunately, we're finding out with a new study just from yesterday that preschoolers are able to read adults' the emotions of adults, even when we're masked and they're masked. It was in a JAMA pediatric study, but still there is ambiguous loss because many, many children, even though we know that masks are important in keeping people safe, and we may be able to phase it out as the vaccinations come through for the younger under 12 people, that there's a spontaneity of communication that's been lost. And so ambiguous loss is the idea that there's loss without closure. So think of it, say, if you think about someone who has dementia and their physical presence is there, but they're absent. And it's funny. You always learn from your patients, because I was saying this to my patient. I was describing ambiguous loss, and I've felt comforted by that idea that Pauline Bloss postulated. And he's like, when I was explaining this term, he's like, why is that ambiguous loss? That's just loss. But it's ambiguous because it's you still have the person's presence. We're still going to school, even though we have all the kinds of constrictions that are happening and the worries. And that's, it complicates the grieving process. Let me just walk you through some images in this picture that will talk about the kind of ambiguous loss we've been going through. And it's still, as I walked you through this, a testament to how people cope. So you see a woman getting married and she's got her mask because she's both happy to be bonding with someone, but then using her mask in a way of grieving that it's not exactly the way that she might have thought of her wedding. And then you have the kind of stresses that may have happened in long-term relationships that we've been thrown together. We've had total change in vacations and how we do holidays and births with all the precautions that we need to take. So this idea of us being challenged, and what I can say to you all, each one of you, is I am sure you have dug deep and that you are providing vital support. This is just to show some of the ambiguous loss that could have happened with people being able to play sports and having to get tested all the time. I teach a Harvard freshman seminar course right now, with masks, being tested all the time, and kids are being asked to adapt. And I like this, this concept that comes from Dr. Choi at the Harvard School of Public Health. And he talks about sort of the Goldilocks principle. And it's the idea that we've sort of had a piling on of stress, the stress of the unknown, the stress of threat, the stress of unpredictability, and the lack of control. And it's coming together during the pandemic. And the good news is that even though there may be emotional and physical and cognitive and behavioral kinds of impacts from this ongoing pandemic, like feeling physically less energetic, moving more slowly, eating and sleeping habits being disrupted, and cognitively more difficulty concentrating, and perhaps with some of our kids either withdrawing or taking more risks, there are things we can do. So bringing that sense of hope to our children is vital. Giving our kids a sense of self-mastery and agency, tapping in to faith and mindfulness, and providing stable patterns. And most of all, also taking care of ourselves and being kind to each other. So how do we help students manage disappointment and succeed in school? First of all, we need to let go of the perfect answer. What you're looking at here is an image of a child underneath an umbrella. And it reminds me of a 2-year-old who was pissed because her parents couldn't stop the rain. And a lot of us can feel that way right now. We're looking for someone to stop the rain. And there's a regressive pull to want an omniscient force to stop the rain completely. Fauci is a good example of who some of us might feel had been an omniscient parent during the worst of the pandemic. And if you're a student, you might feel like you need the perfect professor. If you're a professor, you might feel like you need the perfect school administrator. And I wanted to share with you a poem. It's the first time me reading it out loud, so bear with me, but I think it captures this sense of wanting the omniscient parent, and it's by Ada Limon, who some of you might know. The Raincoat. When the doctor suggested surgery and a brace for all my youngest years, my parents scrambled to take me to massage therapy, deep tissue work, osteopathy, and soon my crooked spine unspooled a bit. I could breathe again and move more in a body unclouded by pain. My mom would tell me to sing songs to her the whole 45-minute drive to Middle Two Rock Road and 45 minutes back from physical therapy. She'd say even my voice sounded unfettered by my spine afterwards. So I sang and sang because I thought she liked it. I never asked her what she gave up to drive me or how her day was before this chore. Today, at her age, I was driving myself home from yet another spine appointment, singing along to some maudlin but solid song on the radio, and I saw a mom take her raincoat off and give it to her young daughter when a storm took over the afternoon. My God, I thought my whole life I'd been under her raincoat, thinking it was somehow marvel that I never got wet. So I say to each one of you, thank you. Thank you for being a raincoat. Thank you for protecting our children. So one other thing I wanted to say to you all is when I was saying let go of the perfect answer, one of my all-time favorite mentors is Mrs. Pigglewiggle and Fred Rogers. That dates me, you all. Mrs. Pigglewiggle hasn't been around for a while, but he talks about how to rehearse to talk. This is Mr. Rogers. How to talk about tough stuff, and he says, "There's one thought that I feel can be helpful to grown-ups and children alike. Sadness isn't forever. I'm not suggesting that we remind ourselves of this in order to lessen our grief. On the contrary, the knowledge that time does bring relief from sadness and that sooner or later there will be days when we are happy again may allow us to grieve more fully and deeply when we need to." So that's Mr. Rogers talking to parents. And I think one of our jobs today is to grieve with our children, to allow them to miss and to mourn, because if we don't, it comes out in anger. And dress rehearse if you need to. And if at the end we have time, I can dress rehearse some of the things. But I wanted to take a brief detour and tell you a story that started in the beginning of the COVID. Our kids are being challenged right now, whether it's having to learn Zoom all day or not being able to hang out with their friends or play sports. But this is a story I'm going to tell you about cookies. So that's a picture from my patient that she shared of her cookie dough. So the patient was trying to make chocolate chip cookies during the lockdown when, we weren't really going to stores. And she got pissed because the brown sugar was too hard and she threw it into the blender. And the mother, understandably, was worried that she would break the blender. Any of us who have teenagers know that worry. And she heads to the store and she comes back with the brown sugar to make this comfort food of chocolate chip cookies. And the kid rolls her eyes and snaps at her mom. And her mom loses it. None of us have ever lost it with our kids, right? And her mom loses it and exasperated says, "I went to the store. I risked my life to buy brown sugar." And so because I have the luxury of doing this as a child psychiatrist and family therapist, was trying to unpack this event. And it was a teachable moment. Probably the mother didn't need to get brown sugar. How many of us know parents who stretch themselves a little too far and then are pissed when their parents don't receive it? And what we really want to do is hold the disappointment and not try to fix it too soon. So we want to turn the light. Sometimes what I see is in parents or in foster care foster parents, providers, or educators, we move to try to fix things too quickly. And really, sometimes what you need to do is sit in the darkness and bear witness to their pain. And that will allow them to get to the other side and find joy. So managing the dysregulation that I was telling you about with my patient, that it's extra challenging for traumatized kids to navigate in a school setting. And often, here's a tip for you all who may work with traumatized children, is many times when I read the individual ed plans, it reflects some of the learning difficulties like processing and attentional difficulties, but it doesn't integrate the relational difficulties. So what I'm imploring you to do, and it's hopefully some of what you might have been learning today, I'm sure, during your breakout sessions, but we need a description in the IEPs of what the deficits are in connection to their relationships. Maybe it's hesitation to trust others. Maybe it's perceiving hostile motives for other actions. Maybe it's difficulty regulating emotions. And maybe it's a pervasive sense of shame, a sense of I'm not good enough, and that's why this happened. And the reason you document it in the IEP is we know from having been advocates that there's a roller coaster sometimes with traumatized kids. They meet one teacher and they're able to make the connection, the life-saving connection, and they learn okay for a year and they don't have the explosive behavior. And then they move into a classroom with a teacher that may be more brittle, that may be more triggered by the behavior of the student, understandably. And what we want to embed in the IEP is a plea for compassion, a plea for compassion. So what I want to talk about here is around accommodations and modifications. Data really shows us that kids who come from families where there's been abuse or relational disruption, and this is my bad on my profession as a child psychiatrist, that they often end up being medicated. And the tragedy of that is many times we're not addressing the underlying difficulties and informed support. So a typical example would be a kid has an emotional breakdown during lunchtime. We all know those sometimes too well. And the parent or the foster parent is called by the school. And then there's concern around the medication. Maybe this is a kid who's traumatized and has ADHD. And sometimes the concern is warranted. I'm certainly a child psychiatrist who, when I feel medications are warranted, they can be life-saving. But oftentimes, and that's why I wrote the behavior code, is kids need increased scaffolding to build these relationships in more unstructured times like lunchtime or recess. Those are landmines for kids who may be vigilant for hostile intent, who may misread social cues. And I've spent years doing safety assessments. Some people like to call them threat assessments, but I don't like that name. And kids end up going into the hospital because of an explosive outburst, and then they come out with an antipsychotic. An antipsychotic is a heavy-duty medication that in young children can cause weight gain and other really worrisome side effects. And it's given because of their extreme dysregulated behavior. And it can create more problems than it solves. So the advocacy work that you do to find appropriate accommodations, and sometimes when a public school can't provide the resources and they need to be, and students need to be in the least restrictive setting, but in a therapeutic setting, your advocacy can have unbelievable good outcomes. And I've seen lives saved by the appropriate accommodations and the appropriate safety assessments. So the appropriate therapeutic placements, sorry. So I just wanted to switch gears a little bit, but it's something that is, we're following a line of logic, I promise, which is PACE, the PACE model. So I do all day conferences on traumatized kids. And this is a strategy that many educators have found helpful. It was, it's just another tool. It's by Dan Hughes. And it's a way of enhancing relationship security when you're either working with teachers or working with parents. And so the PACE stands for the idea, you've got an explosive kid. What are some of the things that might be helpful? And believe it or not, being playful, if it's not shaming, can really help. Pausing. How many times, I have 3 kids, fortunately they're grown, they're in their late 20s and early 30s, but how many times as a mom of a teenager did you need to pause? and just collect yourself. And that's what the pause is. And then accepting, and this is a hard hurdle many times for some of you who may have stepped into taking care of a explosive child, that you want to accept the emotions, not the behaviors. And sometimes in our rush and in our shock, quite frankly, in the behavior, we go to disciplining about the behavior before we accept the emotion. And it's in accepting the emotion that's the tunnel to getting kids to own responsibility. And the other aspect is being curious. So it's asking questions when we least want to. It's when we already think we know the answer. It's when we assume we know the answer. And many times we don't. And I've been stunned when you can get into, and it's much easier, believe me, it's so much easier as a therapist than it is as a parent to be curious. So much easier. And then there's the empathy. And what I want to say each one of you can do is you can enhance in our children who are at risk relationship security. And what that means is staying open and engaged. It's not always about more coping skills. It's that our kids learn to tolerate the pain when they're closer to someone they trust, who feels what we want to provide for our children is safety, security, and stability. So, one good news, you guys, if we laugh, it releases oxytocin. Oxytocin elevates your cortisol and it helps you, right? So however we can bring some lightness to this, we want to catch the bubble without causing it to burst. These are our children and we need to take care of them. This is just another way of saying, trying to understand the feeling before you validate it and accepting the feeling before you set the limit. Anger doesn't travel alone. Be curious about it. So if what you're looking at here is the anger iceberg. And if you look underneath it, you see so many emotions that come underneath that. Embarrassed, attacked, rejected, nervous, exhausted, unsure, offended, worried, hurt. We want that emotional granularity. It's important for our kids to learn that. And this is just showing kinds of things that I wanted us to rename the individual ed plan to the individual development plan. So Federation for Special Needs, I'm asking you to start that. We're going to rename threat assessment, safety assessment, and we're going to rename, it's from Dan Hughes, though I can't claim I came up with it, but I like it. Okay. In order to help manage disappointment, what we talk about is maintaining connection. And I just want to share you, this is a study that came from the UK with 100,000 adults. And they were looking for aspects in adults' lives that impacted depression. And they looked at all sorts of pattern, things that you might be able to modify, like sleep, media use, physical activity, even genetic vulnerability to depression or trauma. And what they found was the most modifiable risk. Far above, this is really interesting, you guys, in the American Journal of Psychiatry, August 2021, was the modifiable risk that was most important was having community. That's what we're doing right now. That's what the Federation for Special Needs does, is they build a community of advocates, and keeping our kids having a sense of connection is so important. So how do we tell the difference between disappointment and depression? So first of all, I mean, the pandemic is a disappointment for all of us. There's no sugarcoating that, right? It's had a high cost. And what I want to just walk us through briefly, because I know some of you may be very seasoned in this, and just think of it as me giving you a little bit of a tour of how I talk with families about depression. And maybe there's some facts that you can share with families. And for those of you who might not be as familiar with the landscape of depression, I'm just going to briefly go through that to provide it for you. So a child with a depressed parent is 2 to 4 times more likely to develop depression before adulthood. And I'm not saying that because I think genetics is destination. I'm clearly not saying that. For those of you who don't know, my mom died by suicide when I was 4 years old. And I often have people who have survived, who are left behind, come to me as a way of reaffirming the resiliency of us. But let me tell you something that's really important, and it's what I've done a lot of advocacy around, is we want to teach children who have relatives with depression how to recognize the symptoms and so that they don't feel shame. It removes the shame and stigma, and we can encourage them to get help. Because sometimes when kids who start to have these symptoms, and I can tell you this, I worked 23 years in a public school, in a school-based health center, providing care to those most at risk. And when patients would come into my clinic, they would worry. They'd secretly think they were crazy when they had these symptoms. So a major reluctance that kids have to take medications is sometimes because they have a parent who took medication. And if they did that, and if there was possibly abuse that happened, they have what's called disorganized attachment. So they have this kind of chaotic way of relating. And the last thing they want is to be connected to their parent in a way that feels pathological. And the gift we can give, if you are a parent who has struggled with mental illness, and this comes out of Bill Beardsley's work, Out of Darkness. He's out of Children's Hospital. That's the book he wrote. And it's around having a safety plan for yourself that you talk about with your kids, so that kids know if they notice that their parent's getting depressed, they know what to do. And you're teaching them a communication skill that's so important. So let me briefly walk you through the key signs of depression. Changes in sleep pattern, really hard to do with an adolescent. The way I talk about it is around function. Decreased interest is completely apathy. Increased guilt is perseveration, where there's a rumination over and over again with small slights that just magnify. Decreased energy, poor concentration, which is often hard to differentiate from ADHD, attention deficit, but often kids will talk about it being like a fog in their brain. Decreased or increased appetite. So this is what's telling you that the depression has gone from being in the heart and in the mind to entering into the body with symptoms which are called neurovegetative symptoms, mind-body symptoms. In boys, unless they're doing wrestling, gym, or some kind of restrictive eating thing, if I see a boy who's losing weight as a teenager, that is a significant warning sign. And of course, suicidal ideation. And for any of us who have children or adolescents who have depression, the research is so clear. Get a gun out of the house. 2 times more likely to kill yourself if there is a gun in proximity to a teenager. So I'm always, when I'm thinking about medication or thinking about changes in function, so the severity of symptoms, the duration of sadness, more than 2 weeks, and physical symptoms. And many times kids under 12 years old aren't always able to articulate what they're feeling. So they much more likely will have what are called psychosomatic complaints, like headaches and belly aches. This is just drawing from, and I am giving you guys a whirlwind tour I can do 2 hours on depression, but I want to give you guys some bumper stickers that are culling from 23 years of me being a child psychiatrist. Who cares about your kids? So I like in the suicide status form, I don't want you to also, I want to highlight psychological pain as being something that's really important to be aware of when you have kids that are suicidal. Agitation, it's something I've missed before. So if you have a child who is constantly on the go or not sleeping at all, and then self-hate. If there is anything that we can do to mitigate self-hate, one of my patients told me that I decreased his self-hate by 10%. 10%, that was all. But it allowed him to become incredibly more creative. And I think self-compassion and cultivating that is as potent as medication. And one of the reasons I have turned to family therapy is with the idea that family is the best medicine. Of course, not in horrific abuse, but many times it's the family who can support kids who are suicidal to bring down the self-hate. One other last thing, I'm always surprised, but some people feel like if they ask the question, are you suicidal? That somehow will magically make them suicidal. And what I'm telling you is it can be a life-saving question. It's like turning on the light. And QPR, Question, Persuade, and Refer, is a website that has a ton of information about that. But please, if you are worried that your child, in whatever capacity, is feeling suicidal, don't be afraid to ask the question. Self-injury, often when you have traumatized kid, it's about intense pain. And the goal often is to increase the ability to tolerate distress. And so as clinicians, we know to ask about self-injury. But for parents and educators, I bring this up because you may panic if your child is cutting, that it means they're suicidal. And we know that necessarily someone who cuts isn't suicidal, but there's some overlap between suicidal kids and cutting. But it's just highlighting that many kids who cut do this to relieve intense emotional pain. And the goal is to help them with what we call distress tolerance. And so again, it's because you're advocates, I tell you that there's James Mazza has DBT skills in schools. It's an evidence-based curriculum that teachers are trained in to be able to provide in the classroom to teach kids. It's a tier 1 intervention around mindfulness, emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. And dialectical behavioral therapy, for those of you who aren't familiar, just means that two things exist at the same time. So the idea of acceptance versus change, accepting reality and working to change it, validating yourself and improving yourself and accepting yourself while also knowing that there's room for improvement. That is the quickest, dirtiest DBT primer ever, but I always get lost in terms, so I want to make sure you're with me. The other thing I wanted to say is BRIGHT, which is the Bridge for Resilient Youth in Transition. Many schools in Massachusetts have this. If your city or town is not doing it, it's been designed to help decrease rates of dropouts for kids who are oftentimes coming out of a psychiatric hospitalization. And what they provide is a clinical case coordinator and a paraprofessional that's paid for by the school. So that they provide the BRIGHT program, if you look it up, BRYT, consultation to schools. And it's, I think it's an important kind of programming and has been shown to help. And what they have is they have a clinical coordinator who will do outreach to the outpatient team. It will teach, they'll teach students how to self-monitor. The actual program often is within a school in a nice cozy room with a couch and drinks, and it's a short-term support. But many of us know, I am sorry, getting hospitalized is a bust in this system right now, right? It is a round robin, stupid, unfortunate situation we're in. And yet again, schools are being asked to be resourceful and help our kids stay on track. And this is, I think, a useful way so that we don't have kids bouncing out of the hospital because they had a 4-day hospitalization. They show up back in school, they deteriorate, and then they're back in the emergency room waiting interminably to get housed. And so I don't get a payback on the Bright program, but it's just, again, just saying, I got my platform right now, and I'm going to try to share with you what I think are useful things. So how do we treat this pandemic as a challenge instead of a traumatic event? And why is that important? What I'd say is trauma is something where you shut down and you have repetitive thoughts that don't allow development to move forward. And it thwarts development. And a challenge allows you to integrate and learn from the setback. So I used to start out my talks with what we've been experiencing, but now I've moved it here because it's really how we tell the story. And what we know with trauma, and this comes from Judy Cohen's work, where she does 12 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy and learning interpersonal skills, and it's been shown to help with trauma, is telling the story is so important. And let me just walk us through what we've been through in just a short amount of time. This is March 2019. I told you there's a time warp, right? And you guys are going to probably tell me it was 2020. It was March 2020. Okay, stay with me. I know it was March 2020. And, there was all sorts of religious holidays that got put on hold. There was the crush to go get toilet paper. And then there was, the Black Lives Matters and the kind of lives lost tragically by some policemen. And then there was Ruth Ginsburg dying, and then the insurrection in January 6th, and then there was Biden being elected, and 2 senators that helped us move things ahead, and then there was Amanda Gorman. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I think, how many freaking first times can we live through? We did live through yesterday a very important bill being passed. Yes. So there are some freaking good first things, but there's a lot that we're going through. And schools, every one of you who is an educator, bless you. I have been devoted to doing webinars to support educators. You all are quiet, and maybe not so quiet sometimes, heroes and heroines, but thank you. So what I'm going to show you here is, this was done during the pandemic. A photographer took a picture of her boy and asked him to what would he put in his time capsule. And he put all sorts of things in his time capsule. It's clearly not from Cambridge. He has a gun, a plastic gun there, a bicycle, airplane, different kinds of gadgets and toys. And, what we're being asked to do right now is build the plane as we're flying it. And how can we build the memory as we're living it? Now that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and there's vaccinations for our younger children, how are we going to wrap our brain around what we've been through? And how do we remember this? And, parents and educators have told me lots of things: a pillow, what they would put in their time capsule, a pillow to scream into, a Bible, a piano, a toilet paper, Cheetos, hand sanitizers, family pictures, cooking recipes. Hallelujah that Thanksgiving is happening and we can come together as families this year. Blessing. So what brings resilience? We all have it and we need to hone it. We're learning to hunt for the good stuff and be agents of joy. And we're learning to live with disappointment and make a meaningful narrative, like I talked about before. And we're discerning what's helping and what's harming. And I know that Rodney Walker talked about the idea of having ownership, taking ownership as being a really critical part. And one of the things that we can do during this time is be realistic with our kids and with ourselves about what you can control and what you can't. Agency is so important. It is the worst feeling, and we all know, is when we feel helpless. So we have to look at what we can control. And this is from a tweet that was done at the beginning, but it's still relevant. I cannot control, so I can let go of these things. If others follow the rules of physical distancing, the action of others, predicting what will happen, other people's motives, how others react, how long this will last, the amount of toilet paper at the store. In the behavior code, I talk about in Survival 101, the only behavior we control is our own. It's a sad fact, but it's true. But we can control our positive attitude, our own physical distancing, turning off the news. I beg us to really be disciplined about that. Finding fun things to do at home, and kindness and grace. And I would say, as adults that are in our kids' lives, we want to really be mindful about how anxious we are. And I also wanted to share Bob Brooks, who's a beloved colleague of mine, talks about Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist and a concentration camp survivor. And this is a quote from Viktor Frankl. He has a really meaningful quote to me. The space between, this is now Viktor Frankl talking about being in a concentration camp and what helped being in really unbearable situation. And he said, the space between stimulus and response is where our humanity lies. Prisoners can be controlled, but nobody can take away our dignity. Nobody. And that's what you are providing for our children, giving them a sense of being treasured, giving them a sense of dignity. This is a screenshot of a Twitter interaction of a therapist. And I just thought it was pretty funny. I don't know why I feel so useless and depressed right now. Therapist, there's a pandemic. Me, I think I'm just a lazy piece of shit. Therapist, there's a pandemic. Me, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just snap out of it? Therapist, am I muted now? Now, the funny thing is, I want to tell you all, a patient sent me that. But I think it's so important for us to remember underlying a lot of what's going on. It's easy to forget right now that we are in really unusual situations. So what you're looking at here is a burnt out forest with growth. And post-traumatic growth is a really important concept. It comes from Tedeschi and Calhoun, and they define post-traumatic growth as positive psychological change experienced as a result of the struggle with highly challenging life circumstances. So you need to be out of danger and not in the front line to have post-traumatic growth. And those of you who are providing safe havens for our traumatized kids are doing that. And let me tell you the facets of post-traumatic growth. What survivors report is that they've tapped into a greater appreciation for life and gratitude, closer social relationships. And many times during these webinars, I've heard people talk about unexpected time with a partner or kids or neighbors, an enhanced feeling of personal strength, spiritual growth that comes from contributory activities, meditation practices, and a form of faith. And the recognition of new possibilities for their lives. So these things, this idea of post-traumatic growth can simultaneously be there with stress. And there's a Bob Marley saying, you never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. So you all are finding out about your strength. You never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. I'd sing it to you, but I'm going to spare you that. So, okay, there's more post-traumatic growth. Yay! This is just talking about that art is the oxygen we breathe, that tapping into kids' creativity during this time is so important. I think if the Federation for Special Needs had an art contest or anything that could sort of tap into kids' creativity, that would be something beautiful. I'd be happy to provide a prize. But, you know, this is, I'm teaching a Harvard freshman, and this is, she's on the right, but just they're having to define who they are in the midst of this crazy time. And what we don't want to forget is that joy is the opposite of trauma. Remember, we want to have fun with kids. And I have heard, and I'd love to hear more in the chat, how people have been creative about having fun with kids. I've heard in the Cape, there was doing baby yoga and making recipes with parents over on Zoom, and, you know, learning how to do chess and checkers and Connect Four, and in just an amazing outpouring of creativity that's happening, breaking the barrier. And Rodney Walker talked about intimate community service and small acts of joy and kindness. If you look at preschoolers, if they have a sense of giving back, that's one of the core things about resiliency. So you see here small acts of joy and kindness with people, you know, kids writing signs on the sidewalk and making pictures for their neighbors and figuring out how to celebrate birthdays and doing treasure hunts. And I have been stunned by the kinds of resourcefulness that people have had to stay present with each other. There have been drive-by parades for someone completing chemotherapy or being released from prison. There have been survival kits for parents and kids with candles and gift cards and journals and sanitizers and lavender lotion and bath salts, and pizza deliveries to parents experiencing parent education. And I am so, and I hope you are so moved by this. So how do we cultivate realistic optimism? This is a origami that was made by one of my patients that she shared with me. And that made me optimistic. We have a lot of amazing strength in our patients and our kids, you guys. They are desperately needing us to stay strong. So this is another concept that people have found helpful, and I think is the gift that we can give to our kids. It's the yes and concept. It's a DBT about holding two conflicting emotions. Yes, we can feel grateful and disappointed about things being canceled. Yes, we can enjoy extra time with loved ones and feel overwhelmed by their presence. Yes, we can be hopeful and feel like everything is falling apart. And yes, we can be a source of support for others and prioritize our needs and fill our cup. So this idea of holding conflicting emotions and teaching our kids that they are capable of this is huge. It's big. It's a life lesson I probably didn't learn until my 50s, right? You can love someone and you can hate them. So how do we radically accept some things that are really hard? Truth is, I don't always know, you guys. I struggle with radical acceptance. You know, that means you don't agree with what's happening, but if you don't accept it, you suffer. And one idea that's given me some peace, especially for this stage of the pandemic now, it's not like before, that before was utopia. And we have a real opportunity individually, globally. God knows you guys know this from being advocates in schools. I mean, we don't get it perfect, right? We are messing up sometimes in schools. That's why we need you. I praise schools and I know they can do better. And so we have a real opportunity right now to restructure, build community. And I'm going to share a quote that from Sonia Renee Taylor that I like. We'll never go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. Our uncertainty is binding, and it's now a shared experience. And we have to imagine together a better future, to dream up possibilities, to cultivate optimism. This is two women from the pandemic, that pandemic that was way long ago. There they are, they're talking to each other. And really, how do we want to tell our story? And how do you help your students and your patients start to imagine a life without the pandemic and the former president and what we've been through? And what happens with trauma is it's fragmenting. It's fragmenting. And part of what we're doing is figuring out how to build a story out of chaos, because narratives can be healing. And we may need to do it over time. And it's what allows us to move forward, to acknowledge the impact of what we've been through and allow ourselves to imagine what our life will look like moving forward. So this is one of my favorite slides. This is something I got from Twitter, and it's a mom, and her son made her a crown. And he told her, "You're the queen of the house, and you have to wear it all the time, even when I'm sleeping." And I would say, I want you all to wear a crown. Wear it proudly, because you're taking care of our children. And I'm so grateful for you doing that. So I asked people, and I'm going to be asking you to put an affirmation in the chat in just a minute, but I asked people in a webinar to share what kind of affirmations do they need, have they used to keep themselves going? And I just wanted to share them with you. And one of the participants afterwards said that she started doing this with her 5-year-old and her 3-year-old, doing daily affirmations of I am brave, I am smart, I am kind, I am strong, I can do this. But these are some of the things that people shared. Keep calm and carry on. Every finish line is the beginning of a new race. This too shall pass. Break down, break through. I'm good enough. Live like you are dying. It's okay to ask for what you need. It's okay to ask for what you need. How many of our students struggle with the shame of having to ask for what they need? The universe is setting us up for something great. My anxiety is lying to me. Be kind. It doesn't have to be today. Inhale the future. Exhale the past. So I would ask you all just to take a minute. And what's the piece of advice you've had to keep giving yourself? Just that we'll take a moment, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat. What are you doing to take care of yourself right now? This is just my website, if you want to see it, Nancy Rappaport. Love to hear from you. So does anyone want to read?
Actually, I thought I would read some of the ways that people bring joy. We have a couple of people adding. Val says she shares her playlist of feel-good music and dances to it together.
Nice.
Elaine plants seeds in the garden and watches them grow, and then shares the food afterwards.
Wow.
I like to drive in the car with my teenager and let them play their playlists, and we blast the music and sing to it together, even though I don't know all the lyrics. I attempt to do it, so she laughs at me. As a group, we each identify 2 positives from our week and celebrate small successes. Janet shares, adore their Lego creations, participate in their puppet shows, and provide a rocket that helps them calm and distress. Helps them be calm and de-stress. So then some of the affirmations.
Aren't those beautiful?
They are. They're great.
And I hope you guys are okay if I share them, because I learn every time. Those are wonderful. I love them.
And some people's affirmations are, when going through hell, just keep going. The only way out is through. I am enough. Just keep swimming. breathing and trying to take care of me along with everyone else, and lots of ice cream. I have to second that one.
Yeah.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Ooh.
Be okay with the mess. My feelings are valid and not a choice. Today is a new day. Every day might not be a good day, but you can find something good in every day. Always weighing the pros and cons. Grateful and prayers before bed. Gratitude, stay in the moment, and forgiveness. Great ideas, driving and listening to music. The different tools that you offered us, this became self-healing.
Thank you.
Rocker. Walk, meditate. Me and my oldest son listen to music and play video games with each other. And no one said it was going to be easy, and I'm not afraid to try. With the odds stacked up against me, I will have to fight. One life, one chance, you got to do it right.
Beautiful. Thank
so
you.
I'm sorry. There are plenty more, but we can also, people add them to the chat. We're going to save the chat and that will be shared. I don't know, Nancy, if you have anything else.
I wanted to share with them. I'm hoping, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to share, I asked her permission. This is a student I have, a Harvard freshman, who I ask all of my students when we study Finding Hope. I teach a psychiatry and memoir course. And I have amazing students. If there's something that has inspired me this fall, it's been my students, really remarkably mature. And it made me think, something maybe come out of this COVID experience that we don't even know, But I asked her to do I asked them, can you make any kind of form of medium to talk about how to give hope in the midst of depression? And so this is her words, but I thought it would be nice to end with a voice of one of our youth. And here it is. Okay, it's just a minute and 25 seconds on it. Hope it works.
Hi, I'm Sana, and this is my spoken word poetry piece, A Meteor Always Looks Better at Night. I know right now it feels like you are hanging on by a thread, that mornings have become something that you dread, that staying alive is more a curse than a blessing, and you're still trying to figure out why the sunrises are so depressing. I want you to know that your presence in this world matters, and if not to you, then to me. And you don't know who I am, but I know who you are because I see it. I see the struggle within you, and I know it is burning so bright that you think it might burn right through you. But instead of becoming ash, you will become a phoenix and rise like the sunrise that no longer holds you back. And if you think about it, a phoenix on fire is like a meteor. So embrace the red and shine right through the night. Wish upon yourself because you are a star. And in the process, you'll realize that so many people are wishing upon you too. So use your red hue because other people deserve to be graced by your light. Other people are mesmerized by your fight. And in the process, you will realize that you are someone else's reason for believing that there is good in the world. That you are a breath of fresh air in a world that is constantly underwater. That you are someone else's to stay alive, that you are the reason that they can smile at night. I know you don't know who I am, but I see you. I see you shining every night. I recognize your fight. Thank you.
That is so touching.
Isn't it? So touching.
Amazing youth.
Yes.
Nancy, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. This has been a wealth of not only knowledge, but inspiration. Thank you again. It has been an honor. You have been a joy to work with, and I thank everyone for participating today.